The complete guide for you to finally build big forearms. Did you know that the forearm involves a group of muscles so ignored that more than 80% of men simply do not even know the proper way to train it? And the most curious part is that this muscle group, when well developed, not only catches women's attention, but also conveys strength, status, and confidence in any environment. Because of this lack of knowledge and basic mistakes, in this video you will see what really works to grow your forearms once and for all, revealing every detail you need to know to transform this often underestimated part of the body. But before we begin, please leave in the comments your name and the city from which you are watching. The forearm is usually regarded as an automatic consequence of arm training. Generally, we see many people doing hammer curls and assuming that this exercise is enough to hypertrophy that entire region. It is as if the forearm were just a byproduct that grows by itself while we train the biceps or the back. But this thinking, although very common, is one of the biggest mistakes I see in weight training. Contrary to what one might imagine, the forearm is not just a simple muscle or a piece of another larger muscle group. It is composed of about 20 different muscles, divided into two large compartments, the anterior and the posterior, working in a complex way to generate strength, stability, and mobility in the movements of the wrist and fingers. That is basically why compound exercises are not enough to ensure muscular failure in the forearm. Perhaps you are wondering why to insist so much on the development of a part of the body that most people do not even train, and others consider secondary. Big forearms are a fundamental part of a strong and athletic appearance. They give the impression of grip power, of someone who is capable of executing intense movements, and of sustaining heavy loads without difficulty. Moreover, the forearm is extremely visible, even when we wear short-sleeved shirts or when we are in situations that do not show the entire arm. Believe it or not, people's eyes tend to notice this region more than you might imagine, especially when it is well worked. And no matter how much some try to deny it, this impression of strength translates into greater confidence and respect in the gym environment and beyond. Let's begin by busting some myths about the forearm. The first myth is that hammer curls for the biceps would be enough to hypertrophy the forearm. Of course, the hammer curl recruits the brachioradialis, an important forearm muscle that assists in elbow flexion and grip. But you do not really believe that a single exercise will meet all the needs of the roughly 20 muscles that make up the forearm, do you? Most of these muscles have functions of forearm rotation, wrist flexion and extension, and even detailed control of the fingers. If you limit yourself to doing exercises whose main focus is the biceps, leaving the forearm only as a supporting player, you are not imposing the necessary tension to bring it to muscular failure. In other words, you are not truly stimulating the growth that this muscle can offer. The second myth is that of genetics. Many think that big forearms are a prize for those who supposedly were born with privileged genetics, or for those who do heavy manual labor. It is true that these people tend to have strong forearms because they perform repetitive gripping and weight-sustaining movements throughout the day. But you can simulate a good part of that in the gym, with specific exercises and progressive loading. Genetics, I repeat, may influence the ease or speed with which you will grow, but it is no excuse to give up and accept weak forearms. Before we continue, do not forget to subscribe to the channel, because in times when many spread junk on the internet in exchange for money, having constant access to correct and science-based information is what will make you progress in the long term in the world of weight training. Now, the most important part. More than 80% of people have no idea how the forearm really grows. There is a lack of knowledge about the anatomy, a lack of understanding that it is necessary to apply progressive tension, and, above all, a lack of exploring exercises that work the muscles in a more isolated and intense way. To help you understand better, as we mentioned, the forearm is composed of about 20 muscles, divided into two main compartments. In the anterior compartment, we find muscles such as the flexor digitorum superficialis and the flexor digitorum profundus, which are responsible for finger flexion, in addition to the pronator teres, which performs the internal rotation of the forearm, known as pronation. In the posterior compartment, we have the extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, and the extensor digitorum, all involved in wrist extension and finger opening. These muscle groups, when adequately trained, are capable of producing force and volume in a very expressive way. That is where the concept of a common training error comes in, confusing engaging the forearm muscles with truly maximally stimulating those muscles to grow. In many compound exercises, such as pull-ups and rows, the forearms do work, but generally as stabilizers or assistants, and they do not reach the point of deep fatigue. This happens because, in most of these executions, the forearms are not the primary focus. Thus, while the biceps and the back muscles receive intense stimuli, the forearms end up just tagging along. They are even recruited, but without the tension that leads to true mass gain. Although many strength athletes believe that training heavily with compound movements is enough, science and the practical experience of many bodybuilders show that the forearms need targeted exercises. This means wrist curls, finger flexions, wrist extensions, rotations, and a whole set of variations that isolate different angles of these roughly 20 muscles. If you have never done an exclusive forearm workout, prepare yourself to feel a different kind of burn. Exercise number 1. Wrist curls with finger flexion. Here, the idea is not only to curl the wrist upward, but also to incorporate the movement of flexing the fingers, reaching all the way to the end of the dumbbells or the bar in the eccentric phase. This places a load on several flexor muscles of the anterior compartment, especially when you fully extend your fingers before gripping again. This detail, often ignored, makes all the difference in the development of the entire front region of the forearm. Exercise 2. Wrist extensions. They work the posterior compartment of the forearm, extremely important if you want that look of a strong and well-defined forearm. It is a region that many people forget because we are generally more concerned with the grip part at the front of the forearm. However, if you desire a more complete appearance, strengthening the posterior compartment is essential. 3. Pronation and supination. The forearm also performs internal rotation, which refers to pronation, and external rotation, which refers to supination. Exercises such as rotation with a hammer for supination and pronation, or even with a short bar, can isolate this function and stimulate specific muscles that are not as recruited in conventional biceps or back exercises. If you have never trained this rotation in a dedicated way, you will feel the difference. Exercise 4. Isolated finger curls. Different from wrist curls that involve the fingers, here the emphasis is almost entirely on finger flexion, working the flexor digitorum profundus and superficialis intensely. It is a fantastic exercise for those who want to improve grip strength and also add density to the forearms. Exercise 5. Use of fat grips. A trick widely used by strength athletes and strongmen is to use thicker bars or thick grip adapters in pulling and curling exercises. This forces the forearm to work more in stabilization and grip strength, significantly increasing muscle recruitment. If you do not have fat grips, you can improvise with towels or PVC pipes to thicken the bar. The difference in stimulus is remarkable. Remember, the variety of exercises is fundamental to avoid falling into monotony. The forearm, due to having many muscles with slightly different functions, responds very well to variations, angles, and distinct loads. Doing only one movement is the same as trying to completely grow your shoulder by performing only one exercise for the anterior deltoid. You are completely ignoring the lateral and posterior deltoid, and that is not going to work. Now let's talk about practical application in training. It is completely possible to integrate forearm exercises while you train other parts of the body, using, for example, the rest intervals between sets of bench press or squats. This type of active rest helps you save time in the gym and still gives extra focus to a muscle group that many people leave aside. It does not need to be an absurd number of sets, but they must be well executed, with an adequate load and complete range of motion. Another interesting point. Many people tend to train the forearm at the end of the biceps or back workout when the grip muscles are already fatigued. This is viable, but if you really want to prioritize and see rapid growth, consider training the forearm on a specific day or at a moment when you can give them all the energy and dedication. After all, if you go to train forearms after having already exhausted the biceps and your grip in pulling exercises, you may not be able to apply the ideal load or intensity to maximize stimulation. Let's bring an example of a basic microcycle of forearm training. Day 1. wrist curl with a bar or dumbbell, and wrist extension with a bar or dumbbell. They can be 3 to 4 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions of each exercise, focusing on complete and controlled execution. Day 2. Finger curls and pronation and supination. Also 3 to 4 sets of each, with sufficient rest intervals to feel the muscles activate and come close to failure. Day 3. If you want to add an extra stimulus, use fat grips in your biceps or back exercises. This will make your forearms work more than usual. Within a broader context, you can alternate combinations and variations, taking care not to overdo the volume if you notice that recovery is not good. Remember that the forearm is used in many daily tasks and in other exercises, so the line between growth and overtraining can be thinner than it seems. The golden tip is to experiment with periodization and observe how your body reacts. Make sure not to get stuck only on that quick and careless execution. Fully extend and then perform the complete contraction. Do not confuse it with doing a zillion repetitions of a fast and uncontrolled movement. As we said, the forearm is very resistant by nature because it is accustomed to daily gripping and object manipulation. To break through this adaptation barrier, it is essential to apply a good overload and perform the repetitions with control, bringing the muscle to true fatigue. And remember, if you want volume and strength, progressive loading is indispensable. Every week or every training block, try to slightly increase the weight or the difficulty. Another mistake many people make is trying to correct grip weakness simply by using straps in all pulling exercises. While straps can be useful for working the back or biceps without the grip being the limiting factor, they end up masking a real lack of strength in the forearms. If your goal is to develop big and powerful forearms, consider using straps only in very specific situations, or keep periods of training without them, so that your forearms are truly maximally recruited. The tip to use fat grips is almost the opposite of using straps, as it increases grip difficulty, which reinforces the work of the forearm. Another crucial aspect is understanding that the forearm requires good consistency and patience. It is not a muscle that will develop completely overnight, even if you apply all the intensity in the world. It is a dense and resistant group that demands repeated stimuli over weeks and months to truly grow in a solid way. It is very common for people to become frustrated because they do not see as great a pump in the forearm compared to the biceps or triceps. But believe me, with the correct approach and discipline, the results appear and are very long-lasting. When the forearm finally grows, it tends to remain well-developed, because we are talking about muscles that are used a lot in daily life and receive constant stimulus. You might also be interested in an isometric forearm workout. Maintaining a strong grip while holding a bar or heavy dumbbells for a few seconds can offer a unique overload on the forearm muscles, especially if you do not use gloves or straps. Try executing something like the farmer's walk by holding relevant weights and walking for a set distance or time. This exercise places enormous tension on the forearm, generating impressive strength and muscular endurance adaptations. And best of all, it is functional and simulates daily situations such as carrying bags, suitcases, and heavy objects. If you want to explore even more variations, it is possible to include grip exercises with specific equipment, such as hand grippers of different intensities. These devices are not just toys to test grip strength. When used correctly, they can provide an additional stimulus to the finger flexors, further contributing to forearm development. Just be careful not to overdo it and end up straining the joints too much, which can lead to inflammations such as tendinitis. Always remember to balance intensity and recovery. If you feel sharp pains or abnormal discomfort, consider reducing the volume and frequency, as well as adopting stretching and massage strategies for the region. And perhaps you ask yourself, how can I, in practice, apply these techniques without breaking the routine of workouts I already have, aimed at other goals such as overall hypertrophy or fat loss? It is hard to convince our brain to fit more exercises into an already established routine. Therefore, the answer lies in what we call an early hook and a martial call to action. You must create within yourself a sense of urgency to train your forearms. Imagine that you really do not want to give the impression of weak forearms anymore. Set realistic goals, such as increasing the measurement of your forearm by 1 to 2 centimeters in a certain period, or being able to hold a certain weight without straps for more repetitions than you could before. Transform forearm training into something non-negotiable in your weekly routine, just as you do with chest, back, and legs. By prioritizing, you send a clear message to yourself. It is time to evolve. I can no longer ignore this aspect that makes all the difference in my image and my confidence. Of course, we cannot forget the nutritional factor. To build muscles, whether forearms or any other part of the body, you need sufficient nutrients and calories. Having an adequate protein diet and a moderate caloric surplus is essential for hypertrophy. And of course, do not ignore rest. Sleeping well is fundamental for muscle repair and growth. Forearms, like all muscles, develop outside the gym during the recovery period. And remember, although you have just watched a complete material about everything that involves the forearm, nothing will happen if you do not break out of autopilot and start incorporating these exercises and strategies into your routine. As I always say, the best day to plant something was yesterday. The second best day is today. Training forearms does not need to be time-consuming. With 10 or 15 extra minutes on some days of your week, you can implement a good part of what was explained here, and in a few weeks, you will notice changes not only in appearance, but also in grip strength and in the stability of other exercises. If you liked it, do not forget to check out the video where we talk about the 11 mistakes that most ruin people's workouts. It is appearing on the screen right now. Thank you for watching until here, and may God bless you, my friend.